With me this morning is Mary Davis, Executive Director of Ohio Police Officers Training Commission. Also Sheriff Vern Stanford, Fayette County, Chairman, Ohio Peace Officers Training Commission. In the light of the tragedies in Ferguson, Beaver Creek, Cleveland, and other places, about a year ago, I formed the Ohio Attorney General's Advisory Group on Law Enforcement Training. And I charged them, asked them to take a fresh look at police training in the state of Ohio. In response, the group came back with recommendations, and this was the report that came out about 9 months ago, I believe. In response to the group's recommendations, we're increasing the number of hours significantly. As you'll see here, these are hours for basic training. Hours have gone from 605 to 653 next year. The training hours were at, for this year, 4 hours of, this is the continuing training that every police officer, there's about 34,000 police officers in the state of Ohio. Every police officer, as of this year, was 4. The working group came back with recommendations to significantly increase this, saying that we were not keeping up with what other states are doing. As a result of that, the General Assembly provided for 11 hours to be reimbursed in 2016 and 20 hours in 2017. And what we hope is that it's just the beginning, that will continue to increase. We have provided, in regard to the 11 hours, we break it down as follows. Police officers must take 4 hours of community police relations, 2 hours of crisis de-escalation with a focus on mental illness, 2 hours of constitutional use of force, and 1 hour of human trafficking. And then that leaves 2 hours of any general law enforcement topic, and that is up to the local department. So that's what the lineup will be next year. These hours correspond to the recommendations that were made by the working group. That these were areas where the working group felt there should be more emphasis. The advisory group also recommended the minimum number of hours to be completed in basic training, as we saw up there a moment ago. They go from 605 to 653 in 2016. Let me talk about these specific areas that are getting more emphasis and a little more detail. The advisory group wanted to ensure that peace officers are trained to deal with people who may be experiencing a mental health episode. As I mentioned earlier, in 2016, this training will include 2 hours of crisis de-escalation that focuses on mental illness. Next, community police relations. The training will include next year 4 hours on community police relations. We have provided that training include implicit bias training so that officers can recognize how one's own inherent biases towards people based on characteristics such as race or age may influence decision making. The 4 hours of community police relations includes procedural justice, which focuses on how police can strengthen bonds with communities they serve, and concepts from the Blue Courage program, a program which is designed to educate officers on principles and practices of human effectiveness, purpose-driven work, resilience, positive attitude, and sound judgment. Or to put in other language, it's an emphasis on the guardian function of a police officer, the guardian of the community. Next, let me talk about the scenario and stress-induced training. In addition, the advisory group had recommended increased use of force training. Consequently, in 2006, all current officers will be required to take 2 hours of constitutional use of force training. Now, let me also mention something that the Ohio Police Officer Training Academy and the Commission has done. Beyond what these hours that are required, OPATA has worked to continually to increase opportunities for police officers around the state to take scenario and stress-induced training, and these courses are for free. We have, for example, 11 mobile academies that can provide this very valuable training. These academies can go directly to the local police department. This is a particular benefit to the smaller sheriff's offices and the smaller police departments that do not have that type training close to them. As I said, we have 11 mobile academies. They cover subject control, firearms, driving, and building clearance. Further, in regard to basic police academy training, we've increased the number of hands-on, scenario-based activities taught in this basic academy from 143 examples in 2011 to now 481. So in other words, this is just integrated in the basic police course more. Now let me turn to the pre-certification areas, and these were recommendations that were made by our working group, and let me talk about these for a minute. The first one you'll see on there is a high school diploma or GED. The working group, I think, was surprised to find that that is not a requirement under current Ohio law. Since that time, however, the Police Officers Training Commission has voted to include this as part of the administrative code. So that has taken place. The Ohio General Assembly is reviewing legislation which could codify Ohio Administrative Code requirements of a high school diploma or GED for peace officer basic training applicants and removing the minimum hour cap. House Bill 204, sponsored by Representative Tim Derrickson and Representative Nathan Manning, passed the House on June 17th by a vote of 96-2. It's now pending before the Senate Government and Reform Committee. So these are the things that have been, the big things that have been accomplished so far. Today, I am calling on the Ohio Police Officers Training Commission to keep moving forward and to implement the other pre-certification recommendations made by the advisory group. Now let me explain again what we're talking about. We're talking about requirements that must be met prior to a candidate to be a police officer entering an academy. Most of the things I'm going to talk about that we want to make uniform throughout the state of Ohio are already included in the closed academies run by the big city departments. So Cleveland, for example, Columbus, Cincinnati, all have already these requirements that I'm going to be talking about, that they must be dealt with before someone starts into the academy. What I am asking the Ohio Police Officers Training Commission to do is to mandate these requirements before anyone enters any academy in the state of Ohio, before they enter any one of the 65 different open academies in the state. Let me go through these. And again, these are following the recommendations that were made in this document. But today I'm calling upon Ohio Police Officer Training Commission to implement these immediately. Number one, drug screening. I believe that Ohio should require all applicants to pass a drug screen prior to admission into an academy. Number two, and these are in no particular order, psychological exam. Ohio should require that each applicant, before they enter a police academy, undergo a psychological exam to confirm the applicant has the right psychological makeup to serve as a police officer in the state of Ohio. 3, truth verification test. Every applicant, I believe, should pass a truth verification test, such as a voice stress analysis or a polygraph. Physical exam. Ohio should require candidates to pass a pre-academy, pre-entrance physical assessment. One of the things that the working group found was that with the open academies, there were a number of individuals who took the academy, did fine, but at the end could not pass the physical exam. And they'd wasted thousands and thousands of dollars in addition to their time. I believe that this should take place prior to the entrance into an academy. And finally, additional criminal disqualifiers. Currently, applicants, the minimum in Ohio is that currently applicants with a felony conviction or offenses that create a state or federal weapons disability are not permitted to attend a basic academy. I believe that Ohio should add other criminal disqualifiers. Now, let me again state, to be clear, many academies, including those run in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, already have these and other pre-academy entrance standards. But I believe it is time to make them uniform across the state of Ohio. The certificate that says someone is a police officer in the state of Ohio comes from the state of Ohio. Therefore, there should be some uniformity about requirements that have to be met before someone can become a police officer in the state of Ohio. Simply put, we need the best candidates possible to become the next generation of peace officers in the state of Ohio. As we prepare to begin a new year, I'm urging the Ohio Police Officers Training Commission to vote on these recommendations at its next regular meeting, which is January 14th, 2016. Commission Chairman Vern Stanford is here. Sheriff, I'd like to ask you to make a few comments.
Thank you, Attorney General DeWine. I and the other commission members appreciate the support that you have shown to our law enforcement profession and the desire to make it better through our training initiatives. At the end of April, I stood before a similar group and accepted the advisory group report of recommendations on behalf of the commission. At our November meeting, with most of the advisory group members present, we had an update on the status as what's being accomplished over the past 6 months. In short, of the 25 recommendations, 8 have been completed, 11 are in the process of being completed, and there are 6 still on deck waiting to be explored. As Mr. DeWine mentioned, there are currently few requirements to enroll in peace officer basic training programs. While some applicants have been evaluated by an academy or agency prior to participating in that training, many have not. And even for those who have been, there's no required standard of what the evaluation may include. Having consistent entrance standards for all individuals entering the profession will help ensure better qualified and prepared students and future officers for the state of Ohio. As the Commission discusses and decides on what actions to take on these entrance standards, I can assure you that the well-being of Ohio, including both our citizens and our officers, will be at the forefront of those discussions and decisions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheriff. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Additional criminal disqualifiers are necessary?
Well, I think that's up to the commission. The recommendations that were made by the working group in this particular document included all sex offenses.
If these type of recommendations are enacted or implemented, do you think this will cut down and reduce the number of incidents like John Crawford or Tamir Rice?
Well, I don't think anyone has a crystal ball, and frankly, we will never know what doesn't happen because something is implemented. But I think when you look at what's already been implemented, which is the additional training in three very specific areas that were identified by the working group as being areas where there was not enough training, and there was particularly not enough continuing training. Coupled with that change, coupled with this change that I'm urging the commission to put into effect, I think our odds of having these type incidents go down. But we'll never be able to know what the ultimate effect is, probably. But this working group came into existence because of these very high-profile cases, which put a spotlight on the relationship between police and the community. And I looked at this from the point of view of what can I do as the Attorney General to maybe be of some help. And so we identified the area of training because the Ohio Police Officers Training Commission is housed within the Attorney General's office, as is the Academy. And so that's why we got involved in it, and I think it will make a difference. I think all of this cumulatively will make a difference.
General, back to the criminal disqualifiers issue. One of the points that came out of Governor Kasich's letter to the police board was a concern by some chiefs that too many disqualifiers are preventing police departments from creating diverse forces, and that's one of their goals, that police departments should look like the communities they serve. Now, I don't think anybody was going to argue about sex offenses, but have you had any conversations with that board about this issue of raising the barriers to becoming a police officer because of past wrongdoing, and whether that
I'm aware of the concern, and we all have a concern that the police departments become more diverse. People who have looked at the issue and who really, I think, have studied the issue, and experts believe that the way you really make a police department more diverse is, frankly, you have to start in high school, and you have to start working with young people who are in the community. It's very difficult when you don't start that early. So if you're looking at something to do, the most progressive thing to do, and there's some cost to it, but is for a police department to start working with young people in that community in a program that exists while they're in high school. That is the way you improve this. In specific regard to what you said, I would again point out that these qualifications, every big city, or the major big cities in the state of Ohio, certainly the 3 Cs, have all of these. So that's already being done. The only question is, do you spread that out among the, is that going to be done in the more rural areas? Is that going to be done in the smaller departments? And I will tell you my personal opinion, that of this group, this is the one that is the most important, and that is the psychological exam. I think it's the most important. There's a small number of people who won't be able to pass that, but having the right temperament, I think, is very, very important for a police officer, and having the right psychological disposition.
General, insofar as forces that send their officers for OPATA for basic training, with the increase in basic hours, what is the increase of cost to local communities to train their recruits?
Well, Mary, how many courses do we have? Do we have any now? Basic training?
Not at OPATA.
Not OPATA. So the training, what we do, I say we, what OPATA does and what the commission does, is a couple things, as you know. I mean, one is to set the qualifications, and so when we looked at these areas, it was on my recommendation, and the commission set these. So we did that. As far as the actual training, the training for the basic training is going on in the closed academies that are major cities, and it's going on in roughly 65 other police departments around the state. And the answer is we don't know the exact amount, but certainly when you increase hours, you increase cost. Also, obviously, someone's going to have to pay for these. It has to get picked up somehow. And again, I guess my argument would be that, having a police officer who is well trained and who passes minimum requirements is just as important in Defiance, Ohio, or Ada, Ohio, or Ripley, Ohio, as it is in Cleveland or Cincinnati or Columbus. But there should be no doubt this is a cost. It's a cost that's already being borne in the major cities, and it's not being borne, in some of the other places. Now, we don't know. You give me a department, I can't tell you whether X department is doing this or not. We could have many of the small departments who are doing some of these, or maybe all of these. We just don't know that.
Have you received objections from the open academies about these more stringent requirements?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, it's going to increase the cost. So it's going to increase what they have to charge. It's going to have to be borne somehow.
Has there been any effort to maybe consolidate or close some of the open academies?
I'll let you guys, that's something you guys have wrestled with.
You want to speak to it?
Whichever one, Mr. Chairman.
Changing the model of the academies in Ohio is one of the recommendations that's on deck, still to be explored. At this point, the commission has not looked thoroughly at that. However, we've gotten concerns from the current open academies that the actions that the commission has taken so far will ultimately close some of those open enrollments because there's higher quality control standards, there's more hours, there's more involvement in the training.
Okay, Mary, you also have, this is, I guess, my question, you also have the issue about the CALEA or CALEA type standards for the commission, for the police academies. What did you all do, Vern, with that?
Well,
Anything yet?
Even though CALEA, if you're familiar with
Might tell
CALEA,
what CALEA
it's a nationwide program or certification of training and law enforcement agencies and training academies. We're not necessarily wanting to push anybody to a particular vendor, but what we're thinking about for OPATA, that the commission will establish standards and certification process so that the academies can maintain these standards, and once they're maintained a standard, they'll be given a certificate of operation, basically. That's kind of a vague term, but they'll be able to function under that certificate, the state of Ohio recognizing them as a high performer, that they are producing good quality candidates, peace officers at the end of their basic training. So that's what we're looking at. That gives the academies an opportunity to say, this is the standard we want to maintain, and most academies are at that level. We have good open enrollment academies out there. They're ran by good quality individuals that are well trained, that have the best interest of the peace officers that they're producing. They have those interests in mind, and it's not just a money revenue. It's just not a let's see how many students we can get. They want quality students, because if they get a quality student on the front end, with the training that they're going to be providing, they'll know that they'll have quality students at the
So
back
to
end.
clarify, you are requiring CALEA accreditation?
No, we are not requiring CALEA accreditation. We're looking at, as David said, this is on deck. We are looking at this as a perspective and not actually having a CALEA certification. Now, if they choose to go CALEA, that is their choice. But we're looking at, for Ohio to establish those standards for an academy that will certify them as a Ohio certified academy.
Sheriff, just to make sure everyone understands that the commission has not made a final decision
No,
on that. Right?
this is
That's
what-
still a pending decision.
That's the issue that's on deck. We're still looking at this as potential.
On the academies, there's 65 open academies. What's the general cost? How many students do they do? And are they, I guess, how many police officers do we need to meet replacement needs, like to meet the job
We have,
Seems like a lot of academies.
it's a lot of academies. They open enrollment produce each academy produces probably minimum of 10. That's what we kind of look at as a class, minimum class, I believe. And with the teacher-student ratio, they may produce 30 at a session, but that's up to those individual schools of what they can bring in, what they can produce, and what they graduate. But we also look at how many officers that are retiring every year, and or moving on to other careers, and they have to be replaced. But the open enrollments are providing a resource for many agencies to look at additional candidates other than, and those agencies actually hiring their own candidates and sending them to an academy.
Well, I'm just
They're
wondering-
looking at someone that's already certified, so that is keeping that market going.
Okay, I'm just wondering if we have a glut of students coming out of these academies.
I don't believe we have a glut of students coming in. We may have students that can't get a job because they don't meet those pre-certification standards, which we don't have now. We believe that with the pre-certification standards, that we'll have less of graduates not being able to find a job.
The other thing, the working group, I don't recall whether they voted on this or not. Someone can tell me, but there's a sentiment in the working group that there were too many academies. The commission has taken a look at that, and I think what, Sheriff, you're saying is the commission has not necessarily found that. One of the concerns of the working group was that a young person, or maybe not so young person, could go into an academy, spend the money they have to spend to do that, and then get out, and then not be able to pass the test. You had a few academies. One academy was down in the 30s as far as the percentage of people who passed the statewide test. So you're really doing a disservice. You're doing a disservice to these students when you have such a small percentage that pass. And the same would be true with these requirements. If you put these, you could do these requirements at any point. It seems to me to make sense to do it before someone spends all their money and goes through an academy, and then finds that they can't qualify.
And one of the issues with closing academies, in which we're not, I don't believe the commission is in the business of closing academies, because the academies are, you mentioned 60 academies that are currently open, and that's probably a fairly accurate number at any given time. But they serve much of Ohio, and Ohio is a very large state to be serviced. So if we have an academy only in London, only in Columbus, only in Marietta, only in Cleveland, then a lot of those smaller agencies, a lot of the smaller counties, they're going to be traveling an hour, 2 hours to go to an open enrollment school. So we make that adjustment with those community colleges, with those groups that are having this throughout the state of Ohio. So we don't want to disenfranchise some of the rural areas from being able to being served by an academy somewhere. But we want them to maintain a high standard, and we think that we can do that. And we can do that not only for the academies, but by the entry, the pre-certification. They know they're going to get a quality student, and at the end they'll have a quality peace officer coming out.
Sheriff, is there any reason to think the commission won't approve those remaining 5 on January 14th?
I don't believe there's going to be any issue. They're looking at, these are very broad things. We need to be very open-minded in looking at these. We're not looking at, as we say with Cleve, we're not looking at a particular brand or particular model. We're looking at making this, and through our discussion, the drug screening is a very simple thing. We do this on a regular basis. Most agencies are already doing what we're proposing to be a standard. So I don't see there's going to be any resistance.
And certainly will be up to if the commission passes these, it's still going to be up to the commission and to the staff to define each one of these and what does that really mean. There's still the implementation that has to take place.
What's the funding? I'm sorry. What's the funding for the
Funding, and Mary, you can jump in here. The state legislature provided in legislation this year to reimburse each department for these at the rate of what, $20 an hour for each of these up here. So, you know, this year they're reimbursed $20 per hour for the 4. Next year it'll go to 11. Year after that it's going to go to 20. Now, as far as that is a reimbursement for that officer's time, really. Now, as far as the course itself, you want to talk about the fee that's required or not required?
Right, so if they want to fulfill their continuing professional training through an OPATA course, we offer many free courses that they can do. If they would like to use some other training service, there's going to be different fees associated with that, or they could even.
Well, that's up to them.
Right.
But we provide. You could do these hours then without really any cost to the department.
Correct.
As far as tuition, no tuition cost. The department's reimbursed at $20 per hour for that. So, you know, what do they have? Well, they have travel. They have, you know, whatever other
And
costs you might have.
Did lawmakers deduct that money from the local government fund? Is that correct?
For 16 and 17, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a little more complicated than that. But since I didn't do that, I don't know.
Are those mandatory hours, Jim?
Yes.
Up to the 4, 11, 20? Are those mandatory hours, or is it just mandatory that they get reimbursed if they do those?
No, they're mandatory. Correct.
Yes,
The law says we can mandate those hours, so they're mandated.
So now, a current police officer takes about 4 hours of continuing ed.
Well, I wouldn't even say that. That's the minimum. That's the minimum. There's
That's the minimum.
some departments that do 40, 50, 60. So, you know, but we're talking again, this whole conversation today really is about what's the minimum.
So by 2017, the minimum an officer anywhere in Ohio.
34,000 police officers will each
They'd have to take it.
have taken 20 if they're going to continue to be a police officer that year.
That's annually, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Those numbers are annually, correct? That continue-
Yeah, these are annuals.
Okay.
Annual numbers, reoccurring, not cumulative.
General DeWine, regarding the psych exam, will there be any standards then put into place about how to evaluate those results and decide who to accept or not accept?
Yeah, this is something that's going to have to be worked out by the commission. Fortunately, the commission will have as examples what major police departments in the state already do. So, and the commission can also look at what is being done in other states. But that's not, I don't spell that out, and the working group didn't spell it out. That's ultimately what the commission and the staff for the commission will have to figure out.
And to be clear, for all the pre-certification, where is that money going? You said there's going to be a cost. Will that just have to be absorbed by every department, or where's that money going to come from?
Well, understand how the system works today. Mike DeWine, I decide I want to become a police officer. And so I find one of the 60-some police academies in the state. I go write my check, pay my tuition, which comes from me, and then I take the course. And then if I get out of the course, and then I'm taking a statewide exam, if I pass a statewide exam, I got a certificate, and then I can go to any police department in the state that wants to hire me. So the way it's set up now, you know, this is a cost that is paid, at least in the open academies. This would be a cost that's paid by the student, not by anyone else. In the closed academies, it's a cost that's paid by that city and by that police department. So you would see, you know, these costs are going to get added. So one would assume that this is passed on to the student by the school, and so the cost has to be built into the tuition. So that student is going to end up paying for it. Look, no one likes that. I understand, but again, it just seems to me that we need to have some uniformity in the state. When someone is a police officer, there ought to be certain basic things And one of the basic thing is, what's the pre-certification for where you can become a police officer? And another basic thing is, how many continuing hours are you taking every single year? Seems that we should have some uniformity here. Anybody else?
Sheriff, did you seek any input on this from the FOP or Benevolent Officers of the Troopers Association or any of the?
Well, understand the FOP was part of as part of the governor's task force. They sat at the table. They've sat at the table with the Attorney General's working group. They've been participating as all of them, as well as all the representatives from the different elements of peace officer training. So their input has been important, and we'll continue to listen to their input.
General, the pre-certification seems to me that all of them are kind of basic criteria that any people would normally ask for. I'm kind of surprised that it's just now come to light that not everybody's doing that. Were you surprised?
I think most people in Ohio will be surprised to learn that there's no common standards to become a police officer in the state of Ohio in the sense of what disqualifies you. I think they'd be surprised to know that someone can be a police officer in Ohio without passing a polygraph test, without taking a drug screening test, without passing any kind of psychological exam which would possibly identify those individuals who are not emotionally, psychologically qualified really to have a gun, to be a police officer. So I think the surprise is going to come from people who think there has to be already standards. And all these things here are not statewide standards. Many departments do them, some departments do not.
Generally, I think in April, when the report came out, you guys were seeking a tenfold increase in the number of continuing hours. Does that work out to be 20, or does that work out to be?
No, that would have been 40. That would have been 40.
How long will it take to get to 40?
I don't know. It's up to the legislature. The legislature, we made our recommendation of 40 hours, and we also understood and stated at the time that we knew that's a cost. I think the consensus was certainly with the FOP and other groups, and frankly, with most of us, I think that those hours, whatever hours that are required, should be reimbursed. We did not want to increase the cost to a local police department, and so I think the legislature was very correct in providing that the hours that are being required are paid for. So it's not an unfunded mandate for the local police department. Where the legislature goes from 2017 will be determined in the next budget.
One thing,
And obviously I would like to see the hours continue to increase.
this $20 per hour per officer is required to go into a fund that is used for training. Each agency is required to establish that fund by law. And so this money just doesn't go in so they can buy more cruisers. They can, spend it on whatever they wish to spend on. It has to be used for furthering training efforts within that agency.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so we heard earlier from the sheriff that there are, of your 25 recommendations, 8 have already been rolled out, 11 are in the pipeline, and 6 remain to be explored and voted on. Of those 6, can you just walk us through what is most crucial?
Well, when we made this board up, I wanted on this board the most important things, in my opinion. Now, someone else may have a different opinion, but these to me are the big ones. And so, if the Police Officers Training Academy, Police Officers Training Commission votes for these, we will have accomplished, I think, the major work of the recommendations. But there still are some that have to be implemented and that have to be dealt with by the commission, or at least looked at by the commission. And they can give you Mary can give you a breakdown. I mean, basically what happened was this comes out, the Police Officers Training Commission staff breaks this down into 25 different things and says these are 25 different goals, and you've been working against those goals. So it's kind of how it works. Okay, anybody else?
General, are you still investigating Planned Parenthood? And if so, what update?
We'll have something for you very shortly.
Can you tell us anything more about what that looks
Not
like?
yet, but we're getting close.
Timeline?
I would hope within the next week or so. Anybody else? Okay, thank you all very much.